Welcome back, class, to our literature section and back to Johnny Tremain. We left off last time with Johnny Tremain going to Mr. Light to see if Mr. Light would take care of him since everything was kind of going against Johnny. Mr. Light thought Johnny stole one of their family cups, and so he got Johnny arrested and then went to court. But luckily, with Rab and the Lapham girls and their testimonies, Johnny was released and was able to keep his cup that he received from his mother. So that's where we left off. So we're going to read chapter 5 and chapter 6. Remember, if you need to take a break, because these chapters are long, just pause the video, come back to it, and then continue. They went to the Afric Queen and ate in the dining room. This time no one asked to see the color of Mr. Quincy's money. The party even grew a little noisy. Santa, Johnny, and Mr. Quincy himself were the most hilarious. Many of the leading Whigs dined daily at the Queen, and no man after another stopped at their table to laugh over Merchant Light's public discomfiture that morning in court. Hadn't Quincy practically caught the old fox thieving a silver cup from an apprentice? Mr. Quincy flushed, and Happy agreed to all this, but more seriously, he warned Johnny to watch out for himself. Mr. Light was very proud. That pride had been hurt. From now on, he was Johnny's enemy, but all enjoyed themselves. Although Santa drank herself sick and silly on the syllabubs, Johnny was disappointed when Rab told exactly how he got Cilla to the court that day. It was not half so exciting a story as Johnny had expected. Rab had simply shown Mrs. Lapham a letter signed by Governor Hutchinson and stamped with the great seal of the colony. It had been sent to Mr. Thorne, commanding him and the other printers of Boston to quit their seditions, rebellious publications, or else. Mrs. Lapham could not read. All Rab had done was to take Cilla by the arm, unfurl the letter at Mrs. Lapham, point to the seal, and say, "Governor's orders." He had not given her time to call the well-educated Mr. Tweedy out of the shop. Rab had Cilla ran hell for leather to the courthouse. He had already schooled Santa and hidden her nearby in case he was unable to produce Cilla. Both girls, he thought, had done marvelously. "That's what Mrs. Light said," the little girl agreed eagerly. "At least she said I was wonderful, and—" "Oh, forget it," said Johnny rudely. That is, Santa was just about getting above herself. During dinner, it seemed to Rab that Johnny planned to go back to Lapham's to sleep, and to Cilla that he was moving in with Rab. But Johnny decided to sponge on neither, not until he had a job and something a lot better than delivering papers for Uncle Thorne. He had noticed the number of boys who came and went about the Queen's stable. The wind was howling up from the sea, beating the waves against the wharves. It was a fine fall, the days crisp and full of sparkle, but the nights from now on would be too cold in the open, although warm enough hidden away in the stable, with hay or a horse blanket to cover one, and the warm animals giving off heat. He slept in the stable that night, and on the next day did find a sea captain who would, in spite of the bad hand, take him on as a cabin boy. Johnny did not like the captain, the ship, nor the voyage. It was going to Halifax, and the cold turn the weather had taken and his insufficient clothing made him desire a trip to the tropic sugar isles above all else. But all seemed settled until the shipmaster casually told him he must furnish his own blankets, oilskins, sea boots, warm pea jacket. Johnny had no money to buy such things. Having no safe place now to leave his cup, he had tied the strings of the flannel bag to his belt. It struck at him as he walked. The luckiest thing he had ever done was to disobey his mother and show this cup to Cilla last July. Now he would disobey her again and sell it. There were many silversmiths who would have bought it, but the cup was so old-fashioned he could not expect from them more than its value in old silver. However, Mr. Light, owning the matching cups, would pay a very good price, so once more he went to that merchant's counting house on Long Wharf. It was the same as before, except Cousin Seawall was not there. The grasshoppery old clerks were bent over their ledgers. Neither moved as Johnny slipped quietly past them and entered the inner office. Mr. Light looked up from his papers. There was a glimmer almost of hatred in the sliding black eyes as he recognized Johnny. Mr. Justice had humiliated him publicly, and the story had gone quickly around the wharves among his friends. He spoke very quietly. "Well, look, I have no money, no food, only the clothes I stand in. I have no choice. This cup is worth about 4 pounds if I sold it for old silver. I'm a silversmith, and I know. But to you, because it matches your others, it is worth about 4 times as much. Give me 20 pounds, and you can have it. Through the melted tallow on his face, there was a faint flush of blood. Although his voice was suave enough, Johnny knew he was furious. I've never yet bought stolen goods. I'm not going to begin now, not even with my own. Johnny put the cup back in its bag, but before he could tie the strings to his belt, Mr. Light's long fingers had reached out and taken it. If you will give me back my property, Johnny said politely, I'll take it to Mr. Revere or Mr. Burt. 4 pounds is all I really need. Now wait a moment, young man. You know you stole it. Make a clean breast of the matter, and I will not be too hard on you. Justice Dana was a fool to be taken, if it by those lying girls. I didn't steal it. That was settled for all time, in court. Once on his feet, Mr. Light moved quickly enough. He was at the door, blocking Johnny's escape. Haddon and Barton, he said. The old clerks came scurrying in, their pens in their hands. Seawall's still down the wharf, seeing about molasses. Very well. We can do what's to be done. Better without the puppy. Now, Hayden and Barton, here's a boy, that Johnny Tremain, you've heard tell. Yes, sir. Shut and lock that door. He's not so sunk in poverty and vice, but to have a glimmer of conscience. No, sir. And so 2 days after Mr. Dana found him innocent of stealing my cup, he comes to me privately, confessed the theft, and wishes to return it to me. Indeed, very noble of him, sir. Mr. Haddon and Mr. Barton, you are witnesses of his repentance and voluntary return of my stolen property. Yes, sir. Give me my 20 pounds. Johnny was breathing hard. You thick-witted little wharf rat, go whistle for it. I have 2 respectable witnesses who will go into court and swear that whatever I say is true. Do you think any court in Boston, even Dana's, would listen to you and your wretched girls if I and my clerks said contrariwise? You dare to suggest you are my kin? Johnny saw he was trapped. I'll get that cup back, he said through white lips. You thief. Hayden looked in the street, see if Captain Bull is still about. Fetch him. If anyone is hung for stealing cups, it will not be me. Wharf rat, am I? You gallows bird. Threatening my life, is he? Now I'm going to be hard on you. Ha ha. As long as you had the decency to admit your theft, having a bad time getting work since you burned your hand, eh? Well, my Captain Bull is taking the Unicorn to Guadalupe on ebb tide. Maybe you'd like to settle in Guadalupe. Boston is getting a little too crowded. More opportunity in Guadalupe for lying, thieving, scurvy knaves. Hayden came back with Captain Bull. Johnny gave the captain one startled glance. He was an enormously powerful man with a neck as big as Johnny's waist, and huge hands hanging down to his knees. Each hand looked as large as a bunch of bananas. The courtly bow he attempted at his employer only made him seem more than the baboon, but this formality gave Johnny 1 split second. He shot out of the inner office before Captain Bull had recovered from his bow. Hayden flung up his bony arms trying to stop him, but went down like a bunch of faggots. Johnny kept on running up Long Wharf and the short length of the King Street. He dove down Crooked Lane into Dock Square, knocked over a basket of feathers a woman was selling. For a moment, was mixed up in a drove of squealing pigs, but he knew where he was going and shot down Union Street. Salt Lane at last, and the little man observing Boston so gently through his spyglass. Then he stopped, looked behind him. The street was empty. No Captain Bull. Baboons could not run that fast. Rab was not in the shop, only Uncle Lorne. Do you still want a horse, boy? He was breathing so hard he could hardly speak. Why, yes, said startled Mr. Lorne. Some time, but there's no such a hurry. We've been hiring a boy from the Afric Queen for a month, and, will I do? Mr. Thornton went to the window, opening on the shop's backyard. Rab was out there brewing up a kettle of printer's ink. The Webb twins were learning how and fetching faggots for him. So just to pause really quick, these faggots are bundles of sticks. So sticks is what the Webb twins are getting for him. Rab, his uncle called to him. Here's that Johnny back again. Will he do for a rider? Yes, Rab's voice, cool, haunting, drifted back on a cloud of evil-smelling black smoke from the yard. Very well, Johnny. Of course you know how to ride. I've never been on a horse in my life. Well, I'm afraid now, really. I can learn. Rab, what? Can that Johnny Tremain learn to ride a horse? Yes. All right, boy, you sit down and catch your breath, and I'll explain. This isn't a full-time job, and I can't do more than sleep you, bait you, and clothe you. But you'll have the first 4 days of the week to pick up money for yourself or to go on with your learning, if any. I've got a fine library. If Rab says so, you can sleep in the loft above this shop with him. If you'd rather go on alone, my wife will put you up across the way. The Observer is out every Thursday, and the papers are delivered to the Boston subscribers on that day. You can do it faster on horseback, but on foot, if you'd rather. That takes most of the day. Then next day, Friday, you start about 5 in the morning and you ride through Dorchester, Roxbury, Brookline, Milton, and so on. Rab will draw you a map, leaving a certain number of papers at various ends. The subscribers go fetch them themselves. So late Friday or early Saturday, you cross the Charles and go through Cambridge, Waterton, Waltham, Lexington, and so on. And last is Charlestown. From there, you cross back into Boston on the ferry Saturday night. Rab came in with a kettle full of the warm, black, syrupy ink. There was not a smooch on his white shirt or leather apron. The webs were black as imps from hell. Rab said his uncle, "Where's Johnny to sleep?" "With me, of course." "Well, you show him where, but first take him over to the Queen's stables and show him that horse you bought. If ever you made a bad bargain, it was when you gave money for that Goblin. But you take the afternoon off and give Johnny a lesson in equitation. Sorry, it's kind of hard to read when it's spelled like that. Equitation. Show him how to fall off without getting hurt. He'll need it if he's going to ride that devil." Johnny's new life had begun. "What's the matter with Goblin?" Johnny asked a little nervously. "Mr. Thorne doesn't seem to hold by him much." "Well," said Rab mildly, "if you can ride Goblin, you can really ride. After him, anything will seem easy. But that's a good way to learn. Now remember, Johnny, there's not a lot to riding except getting along with your horse. Horses are timid animals at heart, but Goblin's the most timid of all." "Has he been treated badly?" "Yes, whipped because he's so timid. I got interested in him out in Lexington, where my folks live. He had 4 owners in 1 year. Each time he was sold, he went for half price. The last owner practically gave him to me. He's not mean nor a bully. He's as sweet and gentle an animal as you'll ever find. A piece of paper blowing in the street might make any horse shy, and he's ashamed of himself next moment. But Goblin doesn't ever stop to see what it is. He thinks maybe it's a little white dog about to bite his heels, and he jumps out of his skin and leaves. Sometimes it takes half an hour to quiet him again. As for clothes on the line, there aren't just shirts and petticoats. He thinks they are white hippogriffs, big enough to carry horses off in their talons. From his point of view, the only sensible thing is to get moving, and he moves pretty fast. Now what you've got to do is to get his confidence so completely he'll know you'll never let anything hurt him. You can't do that by whipping him. Then he'll go through hell, a laundry yard from his point of view for you. But I don't know how to ride. It's about like dancing, keeping rhythm. You'll learn right off. Of course, you'll be scared, but just remember this. No matter how scared you are, he's more so." They were entering the African Queen's stable. "The horse boy who has been riding him for us has made him worse and worse. If I had time, I could get his confidence and cure him. Somewhat. Nobody could make him safe and steady. Now you just look at him. Isn't he a beauty?" Rab had gone into one of the many stalls and backed out a tall, slender horse so pale he was almost white, but flecked all over with tiny brown marks. The mane and tail were a rich, blackish mahogany. His eyes were glassy blue. Rab said, "I never saw a horse his color before. His sire was Yankee Hero, a white horse, fastest horse I ever saw. Narragansett bred. We could no more afford to own one of Yankee Hero's sons than we could the Light's coach unless there were some little thing wrong with him. Eh, Goblin?" The beautiful, wild, timid thing breathed softly, caressingly at Rab. But at the same time, the queer, crystalline eyes watched Johnny as though sure that this was a boy who ate horses. "Now you put on a bridle like this, see? And when winter comes, don't ever put a cold bit in a horse's mouth. Breathe on it first. The saddle, blanket, steady, Goblin. It won't hurt you. And then the saddle. Now you lead him out in the yard. You hold the reins like this, left hand always in the thumb on the upper side, but down on the reins. And you put your left foot in the stirrup. If you get on from the right side and get kicked, it serves you right. There, see how easy? On and off, just like that. You hold him a second." Rab went into the tavern, and when he came back, he had the permission to take out the landlady's genteel nag. With Johnny on the nag and Rab on Goblin, they went to the common. Here were acres upon acres of meadow and cow pasture, hard ground cleared for the drilling of militia. The sun and the wind swept through them. Trees were turned to scarlet, gold, beefy red, blueberry bushes crimson. Through one patch a white cow was plodding, seemingly up to her belly in blood. The cold, wild air was like wine in the veins, and across the vast blue sky white clouds hurried before the wind like sheep before invisible wolves. Easy, easy, cried Rab. Easy does it. Goblin had been cavorting, blowing through his nostrils, begging to be let out. Rab kept him at a close canter. The landlady's sorrel flung herself after him. Now and then Rab would glance behind to see how Johnny was making out. Not so stiff. Give him more. I said keep your thumb up. Then they would stop a moment, Rab making Johnny mount and dismount, trot him from that stump yonder, back again to me. Once again, both in the saddle, and he was setting a faster pace. The two horses tore across the packed earth of the Druid ground, and for the first time in his life, Johnny heard that wonderful music, galloping hoofs on hard earth. At the end, when Goblin had got most of the play out of him, they changed horses. Actually, Goblin's gaits were so smooth he seemed easier than the sorrel. Johnny felt he had learned a lot in his first lesson. A few more, and he would have no fear of Goblin. But there were no more lessons. Rab was too busy. He was teaching Johnny to ride as he did everything else, with a minimum expenditure of his own energy. Every day Johnny led Goblin to the common, for it was quite a long time before he dared ride him through the narrow, crowded streets, and he sat in his manger and talked to him. The idea that Goblin was more scared than he gave him great confidence, and so did Rab's belief in him and his powers to learn. He'd always been quick on his feet, rhythmic, and easy in his motions. He had no idea that learning to ride by himself, with a notoriously bad horse for one instructor, and a boy who never left his printing press for the other, he was doing an almost impossible thing. But one day he overheard Uncle Thorne say to Rab, I don't see how Johnny has done it, but he is riding real good now. He's doing all right. Not scared a bit of Goblin. God knows I am. Johnny Tremain is a bold fellow. I knew he could learn, if he didn't get killed first. It was sink or swim for him, and happens he's swimming. This praise went to Johnny's head, but patterning his manners on Rab's, he tried not to show it. For the first week, Uncle Thorne did hire the landlady's gentle nag for Johnny. Even with the lists and maps Rab made for him, those 3 days of delivering papers, first through Boston, then circling out through the surrounding towns and returning Saturday night by ferry from Charlestown, were confusing enough. Soon enough, these 3 days of riding became a delight to him. He was a town boy, knowing little of country ways. The ships in the harbor he knew, the wharves in the world of shops and trade. Now he reveled in broad harvest fields, orange pumpkins, shock corn, frost-touched grapes, and the towns clustering around Boston interested him. He liked to make a handsome entrance, even if he and Goblin had dawdled a bit on country roads. They both liked arriving at the inns at a gallop. Then Johnny would bustle in with his newspapers and often find the subscribers already sitting about the tap room waiting for him. Because he came from Boston and rode for the Observer, he was often questioned about the political thinking at the capital. By reading the papers, talking to Rab and Uncle Lorne, listening to the leaders of opposition about Boston, he quickly became well informed. In only a few weeks, he changed from knowing little enough about the political excitement and caring less to being an ardent Whig. He also enjoyed the showing, queer beauty of his horse. When people on the streets or at the taverns complimented him on his mount, there would come the same fatuous expression on his face he had often ridiculed on Cilla's when people stopped her and showed how angelic Asana was, but he did not know it. At first he fell off fairly often, and it would take half an hour to catch the wary animal. But once a farmer's wife gave him his hat full of bad apples, and he lured Goblin easily. After that, he always stuffed his pockets with windfalls. If Goblin would approach something he feared, Johnny rewarded him with a speckled apple. But when he did fall off, he would come home smelling like a cider press. The boys shared a loft above the printing shop. It was reached only by ladder, but was large, comfortable, and had a big fireplace. There was one odd thing about this attic, and that was the number of chairs stored there. He started to ask Rab why this was, but thought better of it, and at last Rab told him. It was here in the attic ever and anon the Boston Observers met. It was a secret club as powerful as any in Boston, and here in the last few years had been hatched much treason, as the Tories called it. Rab did not even tell Johnny to keep his mouth shut, but he knew he would. Breakfast they made for themselves. Dinner was sent over by Mrs. Lorne. Supper they either got for themselves or ate at aunt and uncle's. Rab's aunt was a plump, red-headed, white-skinned woman. She must have been a variation of a well-known family pattern, for Johnny often heard her people say, as they looked at Rab, "That boy is a regular Silsby from Lexington." If he was, then she was not. But her 8 months old son was. He was the longest baby Johnny had ever seen. had the straightest black hair, cried the least, and ate the fastest. Never fussed and watched the world through enigmatic, questioning dark eyes. Even Uncle Lorne, who might have preferred that his only child should have repeated the fox-like scholarly brightness of his own face, admitted as he looked thoughtfully at his baby, "That child of yours, Jennifer, is the regular Silsby of Lexington." Johnny became absorbed in Goblin. He was afraid the stable boys at the Afric Queen struck at him, bullied him because he was timid, so he looked upon himself the feeding and care of the animal. This saved Mr. Lorne a few pennies a week on the board bill, and he generously gave the money to Johnny. The landlord at the Queen liked the boy. When guests wished a letter delivered faster than the dawdling post riders, he would recommend Johnny. So once that fall, he rode as far as Worcester and again to Plymouth. This money was divided between the owner of the horse and the rider. And Johnny bought himself spurs, boots, and fur-lined surtout, all second-hand. Although Johnny held the reins in his left hand, as Rab had taught him, many times as the horse was off on a wild tear, he was struggling to get him once more under control. He was forced to use his crippled hand. He could not keep it proudly in his pocket while careening about on a horse like Goblin. Although too badly injured ever to be skillful again, it was no longer in danger of atrophying, meaning like withering away, as it had been in Johnny's pocket. As a silversmith, he had already learned to use his left hand and a certain amount. Rab never said to him, "Now, Johnny, you've got to learn to write with your left hand," but he would give him things to copy, take it for granted that he could, and he did. For the first 4 days of every week, Johnny was his own master. He spent his time exercising his horse, unless he got an order to ride express for the Afric Queen, and learning to write with his left hand, and an orgy of reading. Mr. Lorne had a fine library. It was if Johnny had been starved before, never known it. He read anything, everything, bound back copies of The Observer, Paradise Lost, Robinson Crusoe, once more, for that was one of the books Rab had brought him to read in jail. Tom Jones and Locke's essay on human understanding, Hutchison's history of Massachusetts, Bay, chemical essays, Spectator papers, books on midwifery and manners for young ladies, Pope's Iliad. It was a world of which he never had guessed while living with the Laphams, and now he remembered with gratitude how his mother had struggled to teach him so that this world might not be forever closed to him. How she had made him read to her when he would rather have been playing. Poor woman, her books had been few and mostly dull. So he sat for hours in Lorne's sunny parlor, the books about him stretching to the ceiling. Mrs. Lorne never called to him to help her in the kitchen. She, Uncle Lorne, and Rab all took it for granted that Johnny ought to read. Mrs. Lapham could not have borne the sight of so idle a boy, but Aunt Lorne never interrupted him except to come in and now then with a plate of hot gingerbread or seed cakes, and once in a long time ask him if he would mind baby as she went out marketing or visiting. "I'll just put baby in his cradle here, and if he doesn't go right to sleep, you rock him a little with your foot." The first time he read Tom Jones, he got so excited he absent-mindedly rocked baby for half an hour, but even this did not upset that regular Silsby of Lexington. The baby gulped a little, but took it philosophically, just like Rab. Secretly, and only when alone, Johnny began calling him Rabbit. It was easy for him to love, and he loved the baby. He would have died before he would have let anyone guess he was so simple. But Aunt Lorne knew. Sometimes she would come into the kitchen quietly and hear Johnny holding long, one-sided conversations with Rabbit. When she came into the room where he was with the child, he would merely say scornfully, "Aunt Lorne, I think it is wet," and pretend to be lost in his book. Then she would feel so fond of the lonely boy who never knew he was lonely, and so amused at his pretense of scorn for something he in his heart loved. She could not help but kiss him. She always kissed him where his hair began to grow in the middle of his forehead. He had never known until she told him that he had a widow's peak, which she assured him was a great mark of beauty. "Why, I'd give anything for a widow's peak," she would say. "I'd give a plate of cookies," and off she would waddle, for she was tiny-footed and too plump, and come back with the cookies. Johnny thought Rab was lucky to have an aunt like that. This was Johnny's new life. He liked it. He was at first a little homesick for the Laphams. He had never been so glad in his life as that Thursday, a few weeks after he had begun delivering newspapers, when he saw Cilla and Asana standing by the town pump in North Square. He had left his last paper for the day with Paul Revere and was starting back to put up his horse at the Afric Queen. He had felt he could never go to the Laphams. Mrs. Lapham or Mr. Tweedy had been too ready to let him hang. He just about killed Dove if he ever met him. Cilla, he cried. She looked at him and her eyes shone. Goblin stretched his muzzle toward the empty drinking trough. I'll pump him fresh water. Cilla pumped, and the horse drank gratefully. Cilla, do you come over often to fetch water? It hurt him that the heavy yoke and the 2 buckets which he had worn so often, to his humiliation, had somehow descended upon her thin shoulders. Mr. Tweeny won't have it that Dove and Dusty stop their work. Before breakfast, they are supposed to bring in all we need for the day. When we run short, he says we girls are to go. He's upset everything, Johnny. I don't know he had that much gumption. Ma bets him, and Ma says it's not suitable for a grown woman like Madge and Dorcas to be carrying buckets through the streets, so I'm the one. If you'll lead me my horse, said Johnny, I'll carry the water as far as Fish Street. I'm not going into that house for a long time yet, but I'll go pretty near, close enough to spit at them all. Still mad? Sure, of course I am. Why not? The Santa had wandered off because a passing clergyman had seen the sunlight on her hair and was asking her to say the shorter catechism as proof that she was as pious as she was beautiful, and he was giving her a poke of sweetmeats he had bought for his wife. Look you, Sil, said Johnny, every Thursday, see? I'll leave Miss Revere's paper and I'll be here to help you, just about the same time as today. I can carry the water myself, said Cilla stiffly. No, it's not just that, but I've been wanting to see you, and to Santa too. I didn't know how to manage. They were stopping on Fish Street. It was not close enough for Johnny to spit at his old residence, but as close as he cared to go. Don't you go promising, Johnny, she said. Still, she was stroking Goblin's face. I think your horse is the most beautiful horse I ever saw. I think he likes me already. Yes, I know. I'm going to be here every Thursday day. And Saturday afternoon, too. If there's water to carry, I'll carry it. But it's more important that we talk. Couldn't you sneak off and meet me up by the pump? Yes, I could. Well, will you? She was a sot and stubborn girl. I don't know, but if you want me and Santa very much, I can say, maybe. Santa flew up to join them. She had just eaten every one of her sweetmeats and was now exclaiming over the beauty of the paper poke, suggesting at least that was all the kind clergymen had given her, an empty paper poke. But Johnny could smell chocolate and peppermint on her. Cilla shouldn't let her get away with such selfishness and gluttony. Although maybe it was all Cilla promised, Johnny promised much more. Every Thursday and every Sunday afternoon. Those were his last words, and he thought he meant them. He thought 6 months, a year, 6 years from now, the girls would be as dear to him as they were at that moment. Back once more in Goblin's saddle, he turned to watch them, Cilla bent under the heavy load, his Santa skipping about for no particular reason, chanting the shorter catechism once more. But maybe she had a reason. Maybe another clergyman was in the offering. There was a lump in Johnny's throat. So far in his new life, there had been one, and only one slight disappointment. Rab was so self-contained, it was as if nothing could come in from the outside to upset him. He owned himself. By temperament, Johnny was expansive, easily influenced, although Rab would have been exactly the same if he had been the son of the wealthiest merchant or the poorest tinker in Boston. Johnny would not. When he had been the prize apprentice of Hancock's Wharf, the envy of all the masters, the principal breadwinner of the Laphams, and he knew it, he had been quite a different boy from the arrogant, shabby young tramp of late summer and early fall. Those market women who had counted their parts of butter after he brushed past their stands, Mrs. Lapham, with her prophecies that he would end on the gallows, had not been so far wrong. For a little while it had been touch and go with him. If he pushed a little farther, he might have taken to crime, because that was what was expected of him. But no matter what happened to Rab, good or bad fortune, good or bad reputation, he would never change. Johnny felt he knew him but little more than at their first meeting, but he admired him more and more all the time. Rab did not criticize him, but he had a way of asking him why he did certain things, which had a great influence upon Johnny. Once as they sat in the attic toasting cheese and muffins by their hearth, the older boy asked why he went about calling people squeak pigs and things like that. Johnny was already to do his share, or more than his share, in fanning up friendship or enmity. Sometimes it seemed to Rab he did not much care which. Why do you go out of your way to make bad feeling? Johnny hung his head. He could not think why. And take Merchant Light. Everybody along Wharf knows you called him a gallows bird. He's not used to it. Was it fun? He wondered, going about letting everybody who got in your way have it. After that, Johnny began to watch himself. For the first time, he learned to think before he spoke. He counted 10 that day. He delivered a paper at Sam Adams' big shabby house down on Purchase Street, and the black girl flung dishwater out of the kitchen door without looking and soaked him. If he had not counted 10, he would have told her what he thought of her. black folk in general, and thrown in a few cutting remarks about her master, the most powerful man in Boston. But Counting 10 had its rewards. Suki apologized handsomely. In the past, he had never given anyone time to apologize. Her, "Oh, little master, I so sorry. Now you just step right into de kitchen, and I'll dry up dem clothes, and you can eat an apple pie as I dries," pleased him. And in the kitchen sat Sam Adams, himself, ink horn, and papers before him. He had a kind face, furrowed, quizzical, crooked-browed. As Shirky dried and Johnny ate his pie, Mr. Adams watched him, noted him, marked him, sat a little. But ever after, when Johnny came to Sam Adams' house, he was invited in, and the great leader of the gathering rebellion would talk with him in that man-to-man fashion which won so many hearts. He also began to employ him and Goblin to do express writing for the Boston Committee of Correspondence. All this because Johnny had counted 10. Rab was right. There was no point in going off half-cocked. Twice that fall, he saw Rab moved out of his customary reserve. Johnny always spent Friday night with Rab's folks at Lexington. There were hundreds of fine acres called Silsby's Cove. Old Grandshire, who had brought Rab up, lived in the big house, but he had sons, grandsons, nephews close about him. Grandshire, Major Silsby, was confined mostly to his chair. An old wound he had received fighting 40 years ago in the French and Indian Wars had stiffened him up on him. At the end of the harvest, the Silsbys had a dance in Grandshire's big barn. There were at least 20 Silsbys there, and both Johnny and Rab came out from Boston. The tall, powerful-built, silent Silsby men were easy to pick out from among the neighbors and friends invited. But Grandshire and Rab were more completely Silsbys than anyone else. At this country dance, Johnny for the first time saw Rab move suddenly into action. He flung himself into the dancing. Johnny thought in amazement how nonchalant and even sluggish Rab could seem about the printing shop. And yet he did his work like with a machine, like perfection. Now he saw the dark eyes glowing and the white teeth flash. It was amazing that an old fiddle in Grandshire's hands and the old voice calling, "Gents, round the ladies, ladies, round the gents," could work such a change in him. He had stepped out of his imperturbable usual self. Here was a Rab Johnny had always known existed, but never before seen. All the Lindas and Betsy's, Polly's, Peggy's, Sally's Lexington were clamoring to stand up with him. He loved to dance, and seemingly all the girls loved him. All the girls. Johnny, 2 years younger, noticed with disapproval. One thing happened at the barn dance that made a great impression on Johnny. He forget entirely about his hand. Although in the reels and jigs they danced, every moment a different girl was clinging to it. None of them seemed to notice. Johnny spoke of this fact to Rab as they undressed at Grandshire's. The Boston girls, he was thinking of as Santa's words, such cruel words he had never even told Rab, had said his hand disgusted them. He wasn't to touch them with it. "It is you who put the idea in their heads," said Rab, pulling off his shirt. "You know you usually go about with that hand in your pocket looking as if you had an imp of hell hidden away, and then someone asks you and you pull it out with a slow flourish as if you said, 'This is the most disgusting thing you ever saw.' No wonder you scare everybody. Tonight happens you just forgot." The other time he saw Rab moved out of himself was a few days later. The Webb twins were timid, weakly little fellows, natural butts for any bullies. They never seemed to need any company except each other and their cat. Mrs. Lorne one day sent them to the butcher for stew meat, and they, thinking it was an errand a cat might enjoy, carried her with them. The butcher's boy was a well-known tyrant. He grabbed the Webb's cat, trussed her, hung her by her heels to a hook, and began to sharpen his knife. He was going to butcher her, skin her, and give the carcass to the Webbs for stew meat. The butcher sat by and roared with laughter at the frantic children's tears and cries. Rab heard the terrified screams of the little boys. He rescued the cat, who was the first to get home, with the Webbs on their heels. Next he began on the butcher's boy. By then Johnny had arrived. Together they took on the butcher, his oldest son, the butcher's wife, armed with boiling water she had prepared for scalding pigs, her mother, and a passerby. Yet before the constable had arrived, Rab was out of it, back cleaning his press, and he had got Johnny out of it too. Johnny had a black eye, a lame shoulder, a torn shirt, a bite in his wrist. That was the butcher's wife's mother. She had good teeth for 70. Rab had nothing except an uncommonly high color in his face and a look of intense pleasure. It was strange that a boy who could fight like that and enjoy it so intensely never quarreled, never fought, and he had almost nothing to say about this really Homeric battle. But for days afterward, Johnny would see a look of dreamy content in his eyes, a slow smile form absent-mindedly on his lips. Rab was thinking of the fun he and Johnny had at the butcher's shop. All he would say was, "We certainly made hash of that shop." The boy was a born fighter, ferocious, utterly fearless, quick and powerful, but he didn't fight often, and he hadn't much to say afterward. Seemingly, Silsbees were like that. Johnny had already seen a pack of them out at Lexington, and there over at the Lornes was Rabbit repeating the old pattern. One day, Aunt Lorne came in as Johnny sat reading, with the baby in her arms. For once, she looked a little discouraged. "My land, I don't know what's wrong with baby. There's something, and he won't tell me." "Isn't he pretty young to tell much?" "Oh, no. Other babies can tell you whether it's gas or a pin or milk soaring on them. But he's a real Silsby, and they never do, you know. Aren't you a Silsby too? Me? Oh, no, thank heaven. It skipped me. Look at my red hair, my build. I'm just like mother, a mere wheeler. I can say that hurts me sometimes before I'm hurt. Those Silsbys, they just about can't. They don't tell anything, but they are about the best men ever lived. If you'll just learn to take 'em or leave 'em." Johnny was learning to take or leave Rab.